Hey, Levi.
What's up?
Merry freaking Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Ben.
Hey, guys. Welcome to the Bible's Metal.
Welcome, welcome.
We are back again.
Once again.
At it again with, I don't have any white vans.
Back at it again with no white vans.
With no white vans.
Dang.
All
right. So I don't want to talk about how long it's been since we've recorded an episode.
It's been a bit. So we're just going to leave it at that.
We're going to leave it at that.
Okay. Sounds good.
Moving on. Ben, how have you been doing?
I'm good. Objectively, but also there's kind of that element where it's like, I know I'm fine, but I don't want to be. I'm kind of mad, but I don't really have a valid reason where it's like, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm done with a lot of things. Surprisingly, the pandemic isn't one of them because I'm such a loner and an asocial gaming introvert that I don't really care about quarantine. It doesn't really bother me that much.
Yeah. Like I'm a self-identified hermit.
Amen,
and,
brother.
You know, I think if I wasn't married, that would be a different story. But because I'm married and my wife and I actually like each other, I can be at home for months. And I guess the pandemic's proved this because I've always thought this, but the pandemic's kind of proved that, you know what, I can be at home for long periods of time and not get sick of my wife. And that's unfortunately something that not a lot of people can say.
That is indeed a very good thing. And I mean, I still love my wife after almost, was it now 8 months going on, 9 months in quarantine.
Yep.
I mean, and Utah hasn't had it particularly bad either in terms of
all.
quarantine. Like it's been pretty tame.
Especially compared to other places.
I know. Like we haven't had to have a there was one time. I mean, I don't even think we've necessarily had like any like lockdown. Like the worst it's gotten has been like stay away from people and don't cough on anyone.
Yeah.
Please.
There's mostly been like wear a mask and social distance.
Right.
And I think there are some places that do like limited capacity, but not like extraordinarily.
Yeah.
You know, like you could still go to Costco, you could still go to your average stores. Yeah. You could still go to the gym.
I mean, life is still relatively normal compared
is.
to a lot of places. Yeah, no, the thing that I'm sick of is people are so mean. Yeah. I for lack of a better word, like people are cruel to each other. Like there's people are getting so bitter and angry and tensions are really high and like, especially with like the election and everything, which I don't want to talk about on this podcast.
Yeah.
That is out of the spirit of this. But yeah, it's just, I'm sick of how just the worst. People are the worst. I don't like them. And this is not improving my opinion of them at all.
It's a stressful time because, you know, the world is fearful of a virus, but it's also stressful because it's, you know, the US election and that always turns into unrest. No matter what side of the aisle you're on.
Always.
So, but yeah, let's not talk about that political unrest.
No, we're not.
We'll get into ancient political unrest.
I know that's a lot more fun because it happened a long time ago.
Yeah, and we don't have to worry about it now.
No, we don't. So, what are we talking about today, Levi?
So, we're going to get into our version of a Christmas story. The Bible is Metal Christmas story.
So basically the only part of the Christmas story that they don't tell you about in Sunday school, which is the best part because we're not going to talk about magi. We're not going to talk about shepherds.
Nope.
We're going to talk about murder and genocide. It's going to be great.
Massacre of the Innocent.
Massacre of the Innocents. If you are from a Catholic background, you may already know what this is. And I promise you, we did not make this title up. This is actually what the event is called on Wikipedia. Look it up.
Boom, Wikipedia.
If Wikipedia claims that's what it is, then that's how we know that it is the truth, because that's how the internet works. So
some honorary wiki somewhere, we just put them high up on a pedestal.
Exactly. Okay, so let me pull up my notes really quick because I forgot to do that before the podcast again.
While you're doing that,
I'm really, really proud of myself. Look at me go.
Look at you go. Today we're going to be in Matthew chapter 2.
And we are choosing to do Matthew because it's a better story. We like it.
Yep.
We definitely hold the opinion that these are all factual events. We are just opening with that disclaimer because a lot of people don't think the Massacre of the Innocents was a factual event. They think it was either a legend or a myth or some sort of other supernatural story. However, we are taking it as historical fact. Yeah. And we will get into why we believe that in just a second.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, we're also gonna start in Matthew chapter 2, verse 13, and not quite go to the end of the chapter. We're gonna go to about verse 18. But here, I'll go ahead and read it. Now, when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." And he rose and took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." Then Herod, when he saw that he had been duped, it's tricked in my translation, but I like duped.
Duped is a better word.
Once he'd been duped, he'd been duped by the wise men, became furious. He sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Then it was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentations, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more. Done been duped.
Done been duped by the wise men. Okay, so first we got to give you a little bit of context, just because that's how we do things.
We just read a story in vacuum. Where does it exist in history?
Where does it exist in history? Exactly. So, according to the Gospel of Matthew, these wise men, what they were, I would probably say astrologists, shamans, kind of.
Yeah, the astrology was a part of it. There was a lot of, I don't want to say mystic arts, but there was definitely a lot of ancient sciences behind who they were.
Right, and this isn't saying that they weren't like.
Not like they were magicians.
They're
or anything.
not like mystic, tribal wise. Like they were likely very smart guys that tracked the stars and stuff like that.
Like a philosopher.
That really, or astronomer or something
astronomer,
like that.
Philosopher.
Kind of a mix between a scientist and then also probably because that sort of behavior was definitely classified under the umbrella term of like shaman or wizard or something like that. There was probably some element of mysticism thrown in there, but also what they did was likely rooted in scientific fact.
Men of the ancient sciences.
Right, exactly. So, and the reason that these guys are important is because when they had seen a star in the sky that they had never seen before. For astronomers, this is a big deal because if you see a new star, that's a big deal because you're like, oh wait, that wasn't there. Where did that come from? What happened? And for them, this had a lot of religious significance. So they went to go see that they followed the star basically.
Astronomers tend to enjoy stars.
They like stars. They like looking at them. So they look at this star. They're from all the Bible says is they're from the east. We don't know exactly where they're from. I'm saying that right out.
Yep.
My theory is because frankincense and myrrh are locally found only about as far east as like Iran and like Persia / like Western India-ish. That's about as far away as they could have been. I don't think there's some theories that they were from as far east as like China. I don't think they're from that far away.
Yeah.
And then also to kind of debunk the Christmas story, if you've heard of the wise men, there weren't 3 of them. We don't know how many of them were. There were just 3 gifts. And B, let's see, where else was I going with that?
Well, so there's also the myth that they were kings.
Yeah.
Like
they're 3 kings of Orientar.
Exactly. Like, oh, they're kings. It's like, not necessarily.
Yeah, don't get your theology from Christmas songs.
Yeah.
Just it's a bad idea.
Or children's books.
It's a bad pattern. I wouldn't go with it.
And I get it because like when you're writing a children's book, you say, "Oh, the Magi," and the kids are like, "What's the Magi?"
And you're like, "It's a king."
Yeah, so they had to kind of, I don't know,
jazz it up a little bit,
jazz it up, and turn it into something the kids can understand because kids know what kings are, but they don't know what men of the ancient sciences are.
Right, men of the ancient sciences that were likely just really curious about this thing they'd never seen before. They're my kind of people, man. Like if I was, I kind of have this headcanon that if I was historical, like if I had been born in like the 1st or 2nd century, I would have been like a blacksmith or something like that. Someone who was just really fascinated by the way things work and would have made stuff for a living. So
definitely.
Yeah. Anyway, moving on. So these magi, what they did is they follow the star, they make it to Jerusalem, and they ask Herod, basically. They're like, "Hey, we saw the star. We think it has religious significance.
Who's the ruler of the area?
Who is the ruler of the area?" And Herod was like, "Well, it's me." And they're like, "Well, we've heard about this king of the Jews. Who's that?" You know, they kind of they know some of this stuff already. And they're like, "Oh, well," like, and then Herod doesn't like the term king of the Jews. We'll get into that a little bit more.
Wonderful Herod.
Wonderful Herod. Herod is a great person.
Yeah, they call him great for a reason.
Herod the Great. And they're like, "What about the king of Jews? We saw his star and we would like to worship him." And they're like, "Oh." And then Herod's advisors were like, "Oh, well, they said he was going to be born in Bethlehem, like from the prophecies." And they're like, "Okay, which way is Bethlehem?" And Herod's like, "Oh yeah, if you find him, do come back.
Please come back.
Do come back and tell me where he is so I may go worship him."
Wink, wink.
Wink, wink. This will be a little more significant in a minute when we get Herod is a human being. But the wise men, all they were is they were people from the east, saw the star. They recognized the religious significance and they came and they're like, "Hey, there's this mythical king of the Jews. We're here. Like, this is his star. We're here to worship him." Right.
Yeah.
And then they asked Herod for directions, which was probably a mistake. And then Herod's like, "Oh, do tell me where he is, because I also would like to worship him with the sword." So
like I just said that under your breath, with the sword.
I don't like Herod. I don't think many other people did either. But so that's the Magi. So if you're just like reading this story, we're reading this to you, and you're like who the heck are the Magi? That's the Magi.
Yep.
Or the 3 wise men.
Yeah.
So
if there were 3.
The wise men from the east.
We're not entirely sure if there were 3. There could have been many more of them, which
it might have been a whole posse of wise men.
There probably were more of them because people tend to travel in packs, and 3 is not a pack.
No, that's few enough where if they did travel with just the 3 of them, they probably would have been robbed and beaten.
Yeah.
Especially if they were carrying really highly valuable perfumes and gold.
Yeah. And also, if they were kings, which they weren't, they would have traveled with a lot of people.
Oh, yeah. There would have been an entire entourage that came with them.
Exactly.
So, as it stands, they probably had servants and that came with them. So
they had servants, they had colleagues, they had people that just wanted to come, you know?
Right. Exactly. So that's not super important though, but we just wanted to give you, if you've never heard of the wise men before, which I think is really unlikely because this is Christmas, but if you haven't, those are the wise men, according to the Bible. However, these are also not mentioned in Luke at all. Yeah. So, which I think is interesting. Yeah. The only reference we have to them is in Matthew. So anyway, take that as you will. So, what else is going on in history at the time? Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
So people like to think another reason why we're doing Matthew is because Luke's story is really cute.
Well, Luke's story is more the historian's perspective. Like if you ever wanted to read something and get the facts, but not get any of the surrounding significance of the facts, you'd read Luke.
Right. It's like this happened and then this happened and then this happened and then this happened. It's very dry. I mean, the first chapter is basically this guy begat this guy who begat this guy who begat this guy, which Matthew does too, because genealogies are really important in Jewish culture. But
like you just said, Matthew did it for a purpose. Like, there was a reason. He knew his readers were Jewish and that they would find great significance in learning about Jesus's genealogy.
Right, especially because Jesus was prophesied. You'll probably get into this a little bit in the next, but Jesus was prophesied to be of the line of David, so Matthew followed his genealogy through the line of David. Yeah. amidst a couple of other very colorful characters.
Mm-hmm.
So, but anyway, so yeah, but anyway, the reason we're doing Matthew is because Luke is very dry. It lacks a lot of the drama.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the fun part. Like we like the drama. The drama's good.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things going on in Jerusalem at the time. At the time, they had just been conquered by the Romans because they'd been allowed to come back from the Assyrians to rebuild the wall as of the events of Nehemiah. If I understand correct, it was not Babylon.
No,
it was Persia.
It was farther back.
Yeah, but that was. I mean, by this point, the Jews had been living back in Jerusalem for a number of years, like several hundred years.
Yeah, several hundred years.
But they also were never in control of the area. First, the Persians, and then the Greeks conquered the Persians.
Yeah,
and then the Romans conquered the Greeks.
Yes.
So the Jews had always been under someone's thumb for the past millennia. Like it was a lot. And the reason this is significant is because the Jews were angry. they're like, they're really fed up with being conquered at this point.
Yeah.
They really, really wanted their own independence. They wanted their freedom, right? So they thought over time, this view of who Jesus was going to be had morphed into this warrior king who was going to throw off the oppressors and conquer Jerusalem and like proclaim his victory on Temple Mount and claim Israel for the Israelites, right?
Yeah, like the Jewish perspective of Jesus, or the Messiah as they knew him, was not just to be the Jesus that we know.
Right.
Jesus who came, who was a very peaceful man, wasn't even political in the slightest. They always saw him as, he's going to come and he's going to destroy the Roman Empire. He's going to revolt and bring the Jews back up to our, theocratic nation like we were of old, and going to restore the throne of David and all this stuff. And like Jesus was essentially their war hero,
right? That
never became a war hero,
right? And it's funny, like when you actually read the Gospel of Luke, some of this actually starts to show through. Like in Zechariah's song, he sings about how Jesus is going to come and crush their enemies. Like, and then what was the other one that I think, like Herod had bought into this narrative, right? And that's one of the reasons why he was so paranoid. It's like, oh, hey, the king of the Jews is here.
Yeah.
He's like, I better kill him.
The moment the phrase king of the Jews showed up, Herod, that's the thing. People don't realize that Herod actually knows a lot about Jewish culture.
He does. Well, he grew up as a Jew. Like he was Jewish. He was from the area. I mean, he was ethnically like Arab, I think was the technical.
But he was the tetrarch of the Jews because of his upbringing.
Right.
And so he was well versed in who the Messiah was. And so the minute somebody came along and said, "Oh, the king of the Jews, the Messiah is born," automatically he's threatened.
Right,
and
exactly.
He's threatened for good reason, but not quite for the reason that he thinks.
Right, exactly. So, and this is a really great segue into Herod. Who is Herod? Herod was
Tell us, Ben.
Herod was the governor of
Tetrarch,
I guess it'd be a bit like he was basically like a puppet king for Rome.
Yes.
That's essentially what he was. Like he had autonomy in the region.
He was a subtitle
directly around Jerusalem, but he was also totally in Rome's pocket. I mean, I think that's even like he actively pursued the support of Rome. So like that wasn't it wasn't so much like a oh, you're under our thumb kind of thing. He's like, oh, daddy, give me money. Like, he was Rome was his sugar daddy.
Yeah.
Like he
give me money.
He loved the Romans, which also made him super unpopular with the Jewish populace.
Very much so.
And he knew that. He knew it was not well liked. They call him Herod the Great because this is a historical figure. We actually know more about him from other sources than the Bible. Which honestly is actually kind of rare for biblical figures. But because the Romans were really good about keeping records and stuff, we know a lot about Herod. We know a lot about Pontius Pilate, and other characters from this time period.
Well, the Greeks too.
Yeah,
I mean, the Greeks. I think a lot of that came from Greek culture.
Yeah, it did.
A lot of what Roman culture was born out of Greek culture.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, because you'll see it like Rome has adopted Greek gods and Greek customs and Greek architecture and stuff like that. But so they call him Herod the Great because he actually did a lot of things that on paper were good. He built a lot of really cool building projects. Like he rebuilt the temple. He built roads everywhere, and roads are significantly more underrated than people think because they allow like really rapid, safe transit from city to city, where you can move goods and people really quickly. He built a lot of buildings, and he was really And he spent a lot of money in that way, but also that came with the dark side because he also did away with a lot of crime. But the reason why is because he was an absolute tyrannical despot. Like,
yeah, he was a tyrant.
Yeah. So he did away with crime because he would just kill you if he caught you doing anything. Like,
step out of line, you're dead.
Yeah, step out of line, you're dead. If you're born and you threaten my power, you're dead. He killed at least 3 of his own sons and his wife and several members of his court that we know of. Like, he was a really paranoid, like there are people that are saying that he likely suffered from paranoid delusions, because he was psychotic. This dude, I mean, his body count was through the roof. So like, he did away with crime because he just killed everyone that considered committing one. Like, he was he was a tyrant. And I wouldn't go so far as to say he used slave labor on his building products or something like that. I wouldn't be surprised. But yeah, so Herod was the mad king. They call him Herod the Great because on paper he looked really cool, but he actually killed a lot of people.
Yeah.
His reign was one of terror. He had a secret police. His bodyguard, he had over 2,000 bodyguards. Like, he was paranoid, he was violent, he was angry. Anyone that came up that threatened his reign or his power would basically be disposed of almost immediately. Like, the dude was ruthless. So this is Herod.
Yep.
Right. And that's why this is kind of important as we kind of get into the main crux of this story. Why did Herod go into Bethlehem and murder every child under 2 years of age? And just for a little more historical context. So Herod, he heard that, like, the Magi, like, hey, we saw who is the king of the Jews. We saw his star in the east and we came to worship him.
Yep.
That immediately set alarm bells ringing in Herod's head, where he's like, oh, it's the warrior king. He's here. I'm going to kill him.
Yep.
I know that the prophecy said he was just born in Bethlehem. So then he sends his guards to go kill everyone under the age of 2 in Bethlehem, which actually was only about 7 people, between 7 and 30. Estimates vary fairly widely. But Bethlehem was a really small village.
Yeah.
It was kind of backwater. A lot of historians, I don't think, from what I understand, the only reference to this particular event is in the Bible. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's not factually accurate. Yeah. I personally believe it is, because I trust the truth of the Bible and the authenticity of the Bible, but also because Herod's body count was so high that him sending some of his secret police to go kill a couple dozen children in a backwater village is not of note for this leader at all.
It's one of those little small things that, will never be written down in the annals of history. I mean, unless it exists in the Bible. Right. Because it was so insignificant. It was like, oh, hey, just, go find every kid, that's under 2 years of age and just go kill him. Yeah. Like, there was no way that was just going to show up in history. Yeah. Because it was so insignificant.
Well, he was such a bad person. It's like, well, there's a lot of other reasons he was a bad person that they decided to expand upon. Josephus is probably our primary source of information for this guy.
But then, like, another thing to throw on that is, like, a lot of people discount the Bible because it's the Bible. Like, we always say, the Bible's not trustworthy. But the thing is,
we found this in the Bible, but that's usually what follows. Yeah.
But the Bible is just as much of a historical document as any of the other documents that we have of Herod outside of the biblical history.
Yeah. If not one of the best preserved and most copied and well documented not prehistorical, but historic documents that we have today. Like, even to the point where our earliest complete text only came about a couple hundred years after the birth of Jesus. Like, we have fragments from before that, which also kind of corroborate the accuracy of a lot of this stuff.
Some of the fragments come from like the 70s.
But we have complete copies of Greek New Testament that only came a couple hundred years after Jesus. Like, that's not a lot of time in the grand scheme of things.
And all other records of Herod are like hundreds of years past that.
Right. Yeah.
Like, so the other records, the extra biblical records, I guess, or not the extra biblical, but records that other historians kept and whatnot, the earliest surviving copy of them are far, far surpassed what our earliest copy of the Bible is, of this account. And so, if anything, if you just want to call into question any historical account just by the earliest copy of it, this is the earliest account of Herod the Great.
Yeah, and the reason I just kind of mentioned that is not because I personally doubt the authenticity of the Bible, but I know that some of our listeners may just because they hear, oh, it's from the Bible, it was probably embellished. It's like, I would really challenge people, if that's your reaction, when you hear that a historical event happened in the Bible, I would challenge you to kind of look at that and say, oh, like, well, why would that not be an accurate document?
If that's the case, you'd have to question all the other historical documents, all the
we've
other
ever
ancient
gotten
documents
from the region, because we have plenty. Like some of my favorite documents that I come across in our research is we actually have letters that the kings of Canaan wrote to Egypt to complain about the Jews. We have those letters today. Like we have them in museums and stuff. So like a lot of these, just because it's from the Bible doesn't necessarily mean that it's embellished or something like that. If anything, because the Bible has been so meticulously maintained over the years, it actually makes it one of the most accurate documents we have.
Yeah.
And if you actually look into it, a lot of this stuff is pretty easily corroborated through archaeological records and other extra biblical accounts and stuff like that. So I would challenge you, if you do kind of recoil at the idea of us using the Bible as a historical factual document.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd look into it. I mean, it's pretty interesting if you really want to look into it. So
it really is.
Anyway, so that's kind of what's going on. This is Herod. There's the background of the story. He hears the king of the Jews. The dude is paranoid as hell. And he's like, I'm going to go and murder all these kids so that way no one can take my power.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. And so you imagine the Roman soldiers at that point going throughout this small town. And, I'd imagine there's a record of various people as well, because, I mean, censuses were taken all the time. I don't know how often they were, but they
7
were
years.
Yeah.
14 years, I believe.
Yeah.
So I might have to check that. If you guys look at that and say, that's wrong, go ahead and tell me on Facebook and I'll correct it in the next episode.
Yeah. So there were records of like which people were, a part of what territory and whatnot. Right. And so, especially with how small this town was, it wasn't a big job for them to go house to house and, essentially barge in. There was no knocking. It was, we're going to barge in. We're going to verify real quick if you have a 2-year-old child or under.
Right. And because Herod he was the despot. He was the undisputed leader of the region.
Yep.
And had Rome in his back pocket. So if anyone stood up to him, they would have had the full force of the Roman legion to kind of answer for that. So it's like, it's not like anyone could really do anything either. Yeah. So because the Romans didn't really care as long as he kept the taxes coming in.
At the very best, people can hide their children.
Right.
You know? And in this regard, the only one that we know of that was safe was Jesus.
Yeah.
And it was specifically because of special revelation.
Right.
God told Joseph to flee to Egypt.
It's like, yo, dude, you need to bounce.
Like
right?
overnight. Like, yo, get out of Dodge.
Yeah, you need to leave.
Because Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him.
Right.
Like that's the intention here. So because of the special revelation that Joseph got, Jesus was spared, but unfortunately, as far as we know, every other child did.
And I do also want to add a little bit of my own theory crafting. Because in Luke, if you do want to look into this, in Luke, it does mention that they're in Jerusalem 40 days after Mary's birth. Mm-hmm. I still think that works because of everyone in the census. That doesn't necessarily mean that they went to Egypt right away, because Mary had to go through, because she just had a baby. There were some very, very specific rules set out in the law, that in the Jewish law, that Mary had to follow to be purified after childbirth. For males, it was 40 days. If I'm not mistaken, I believe it's 40 days. So that means that for at least 40 days, they're still in the vicinity of Jerusalem. Yeah. But because of the census and everyone returning back to the land of their birth.
Bethlehem.
Well, but they were in the temple in Jerusalem. It specifically says in Luke, the temple in Jerusalem.
Yeah, you're right.
And also Bethlehem's only 5 miles away.
Yeah.
So it's not, I mean, it's a brisk walk. It's not far.
It's a hop and a jump.
So because of the amount of people that were in the region, they probably would have been able to hide from Herod for long enough for her to be able to go through her rites and then skip town and go to Egypt. So that's how we would tie Matthew and Luke together.
Yeah. So
I think we're both in agreement about that.
Yeah. It wasn't like Jesus, okay, Jesus is born. All right.
We gotta go.
Yeah. No, there was some time that kind of flushed in. And also there was also enough time for the shepherds to show up.
Right. For the shepherds to show up. And also there's estimates that the wise men didn't actually make it into Jerusalem for a number of years after Jesus' birth.
Yeah.
So he might have already been in, like Jesus might have already been a young boy when this happened. And then
I would say young boy. He was still an infant.
Yeah, infant. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say young boy, but yeah, he was an infant when they showed up.
Yeah.
So when Herod got wind, is like, oh, the king of the Jews has been born. We're gonna kill everyone.
Yeah.
They're like, then that's when the angel told Mary and Joseph was like, okay, you guys got to go. Like Herod's about to lose his mind, and this makes sense because Herod did die when Jesus was about 5. So because the best estimates is Jesus was born. The census that is mentioned in Luke is an actual factual event. It's really helpful because Luke mentions it because it allows us to place dates, and that means that Jesus was born probably about 4 BC, and Herod died in 1 BC, so about 3 years later. So they were in Egypt for a number of years.
Yeah.
Before they were able to come back, and Herod had died. So.
Yeah, and so contrary to other Christmas stories, there are some, and this bothers me every time. There are some Christmas stories where the shepherds and the Magi show up at the same time, and they're both looking at Jesus in the manger.
It's the night of Jesus's birth, and
they're looking at him in the manger, and the star is shining down on him. That is not how it happened. Mm-hmm. Like the shepherds were there; they showed up during the manger scene.
It's very much, it's very, very likely that the shepherds were there while Jesus was in the manger within the first day or so of his birth.
Yeah. So, and that was specifically what the angel told the shepherds. Mm-hmm. The angels that showed up and scared the bejesus out of them,
right?
Said, hey, go find a baby in a manger.
Yeah.
And they went and they found a baby in a manger.
Right.
And when it came to the Magi, they found them totally at a different place. Mm-hmm. They were not at the manger anymore.
Right.
And so,
So it's just the Magi happened to hope they'd managed to show up to Bethlehem the day Jesus was born, which I mean would be kind of cool from a dramatic sense, but it's like, that's probably not what happened.
Not what happened.
So, so that's probably a good place to start. But yeah, anyway, so that's kind of the historical side of it. That's what's going on in the world. Herod was crazy. He decided to go kill people because he thought that they threatened his reign even when they were 2. So
they were 2.
It's so Harry was crazy. Anyway, explain why all of this is significant, Levi.
Yeah, so there's the historical aspect of it, and that kind of gives us, like, I guess it paints the scene, that's the skeleton of the story, I would say. But then you got to put some meat on the story. Like, what's the significance of Herod, being threatened by Jesus? Why is he threatened by Jesus? And, why is there even this story? Why does it even exist?
Right, yeah.
That Herod was threatened by this king of the Jews or whatever. And it really, really comes down to, I guess, the whole story that God has painted throughout the whole biblical history. Mm-hmm. And this story ultimately finds its beginning back in the Genesis story. This was back in Genesis chapter 3 when Adam and Eve, they had just been found out for their sin for eating the piece of fruit. And, God is confronting them about it. And of course, they sell out the serpent and say, it was the serpent that tricked us, or the woman said the serpent tricked her and all that. And there was all that whole back and forth and whatnot. But essentially God declared at that time, he's like, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring, and he shall bruise your head and you shall bruise his heel. And this specific part,
you shall crush his head.
Yeah, some translations go that far with it.
Oh, they do? Okay.
Yeah.
So okay. Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to
as far as the English Standard Version, it uses bruise both times.
Okay.
But you're right, some translations do go as far as bringing more severity to what Jesus would do, or what the seed of the woman would do, or the offspring of the woman do to the serpent, than what the serpent do to him. Mm-hmm. And you could debate translations and all that.
Yeah, that's fair.
But yeah, so essentially what this right here, many, great Bible scholars throughout the ages have called this what's called the proto-evangelium. I know it sounds like a type of jelly, but
proto-evangelium.
Proto-evangelium.
That sounds like a Harry Potter spell. Proto-evangelium.
You're not wrong. Oh my gosh. Oh gosh. Now I'm not going to get that out of my head. So what does this magical spell, proto-evangelium, mean? It means the first announcement. Yeah, it's okay. It means the first announcement of the gospel.
Okay.
It's the first occurrence of what the gospel is in Scripture. Of course, in a more, I guess, allegorical sense. I mean, it's not a flat statement. Jesus came to die on the cross for the sins, and then so on and so forth.
It's not flat. It's a swish and a flick.
Swish
Sorry, I can't let it go. That's what you get for bringing me beer before we do this. So now I'm kind of unhinged.
Speaking of beer,
drinking beer is not a sin, ladies and gentlemen.
It is not. Anyway, back to the joy of the text. So anyway, the proto-evangelium, first announcement of the gospel. What this passage signifies to us, and this is kind of a rolling theme throughout Scripture, is that there will always be a struggle between the offspring of the woman and the offspring of the serpent, and that finds its, I guess, manifestations in a lot of stories throughout Scripture, but a few that I could highlight here off the top of my head and in my notes. So you have, for example, the line of Seth versus the line of Cain. You know, Cain and Abel were the firstborn children of Adam and Eve. Cain myrtleized Abel with a rock.
Yep.
And then their next born son was named Seth. And Seth was the one who carried the line, as far as the genealogies in the Bible are concerned.
Right, yeah.
When you read the Matthew text.
When you go to Noah, then Noah to David.
Exactly.
David. Yes, right.
When you read the Matthew genealogy, Seth is brought up, and Seth is the first part of that. Adam, but then Seth is brought up as being a part of the line of the Messiah. And this is kind of why we wanted to highlight Matthew. Matthew, in that genealogy, are we not recording anymore?
I don't know what's going on. Hold on. Yeah, no, we're good. Okay.
It
just glitched out for a second.
Okay,
we're good.
all right. We're still recording. Moving on. That genealogy highlights the line of the Messiah, the line of Jesus. And Seth is a part of that line. And so you have Seth and Cain. You have the two diverging verses there. Seth is the line of promise, the line of Messiah, the seed of the woman. Cain is the line of the serpent, the one who attacks and tries to destroy that line of the Messiah. And then you have Sarah and Hagar. Sarah was the barren woman. Hagar was the fertile woman who had Ishmael. And Sarah was told by God specifically.
But Ishmael was also the child had in sin because Abraham decided, hey, I'm going to take control of the situation.
Exactly.
Right. I'm going to do my will. I'm going to pose my will on God's will.
Another metal story for another time.
Right.
But yeah, essentially Sarah was to bear the child of promise because God promised her, this time next year, you'll bear a son. And that was the child of promise kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And so when she did bear a son, you had Isaac and Ishmael.
Yeah.
And those two were the competing, again, it's the line of promise or the seed of the woman, the seed of the serpent. Ishmael being the seed of the serpent, Isaac being the seed of the woman. And then it comes down again. You have Jacob versus Esau. You have Israel versus the Gentiles. And now here again, you now have the seed of the woman, Mary, and the seed of the serpent, Herod. And so this is yet again continually reinforcing what very smart Bible scholars called typology. It's essentially all of those people in that growing line, that growing narrative, are the prototypes of the real type, which is Jesus or the devil, basically.
Right.
And so once you get to the actual story of Christ in the Gospels, you now have the ultimate culmination of that struggle between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And Jesus being the final type, the final manifestation of that story of the proto-evangelium. Proto-evangelium. Dang it. And so, yeah, that's kind of like the theological significance of this story is that here we are yet again in the same struggle that's been existing throughout the whole of history, that Herod is trying to snuff out the line of the Messiah.
Right.
And because of God's interference every single time, and it has always been God's interference every single time, in all those stories that I've mentioned, it was God interfering. It was God making promises. It was God preserving a remnant of Israel, preserving people against harm, It was always God doing that. And yet here again, God is preserving his son, now born of, Mary.
Human flesh, right.
Yeah. And so now through the same means, he's going to tell Joseph, hey, flee, take the child to Egypt, protect him.
Yeah.
And that was through a supernatural means. Just as he has done throughout history.
Because God's always kind of had his fingers in it and going, it's like, because this is my plan. And this is something that I think is really important to note, is that God doesn't operate on the scale of human life.
We would differ on that, but
Well, no, yeah. I know. Well, I'm not saying it. I'm not saying always. I'm just saying that his plan is over thousands and thousands of years.
Oh,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
So no, that's what I'm trying to say. Is I'm not saying that God doesn't interact with us now today. I think He does.
Gotcha.
Very very much so.
I
But
misunderstood.
no, yeah. But what I'm saying is like God's plan and God's timeline is not necessarily on the scale of dozens of years. It can be.
Mhm.
Sometimes it is. A lot of times it is. A lot of the times that His grand plan will take place before your 10th grandchild is born, right? like that's something that's really important to note is like, and it can be really discouraging for a lot of Christians nowadays. We're like, oh, why isn't your plan coming to fruition? He goes, oh, well, it won't for another 600 years, right?
Why isn't God doing anything about the unrest today?
Well, just wait,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah.
because who knows what He's doing? We don't know what He's doing. It may not come to full fruition and we won't be able to see His fingerprints.
Mhm.
Because that's the cool thing about the genealogy in the beginning is we can see God moving,
Mhm.
right? Bringing these people in. Some of them are less than reputable people that
Very
He
much
used,
so.
like Rahab the prostitute,
Uh-huh.
Tamar, the dude or the lady who bribed her father-in-law to sleep with her on accident that he didn't know about it,
Uh-huh. Poor guy.
to get a child. All of these were people that were in
The line of the Messiah.
King David himself murdered a
Uriah the
man for his
Hittite.
wife. Yeah.
Yep.
Like God used broken people and everyone would look at that and say like, what are you doing? He goes, you'll see.
Yeah.
And now we look at this genealogy and we get to see God moving over the course of thousands of years to bring about His ultimate plan, which is the birth of Jesus Christ, which is really cool.
I love it when Scripture says, God doesn't think as man does,
No.
and what God sees and what God does is He uses the shameful things of the world to shame the
Right.
the upright or whatever. Not the upright, but He uses the low things of the world to shame the proud or whatever.
Right.
And that always told me that God is the God of the underdog.
Yeah.
He's the God of the people that are insignificant. He's the God of the people that usually don't matter in the grand scheme of things. And yet He, as the divine creator of all of this, has given some of the most lowliest people in history the most greatest significance in history.
Right.
Specifically because of the line of the Messiah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you're right.
It's like, I will use you in my ultimate plan to bring about peace. You won't know it.
Yeah.
Like I guarantee you that like when Ruth was alive, for instance, or Rahab, all they do is they just, oh, hey, I love living in an apartment. But like when they brought up, like when Rahab was like, when God's like, hey, I will bless you because you helped my people back in Judges. Rahab didn't know this is how God was going to bless her. She probably didn't for the rest of her life. She may not have had a very easy life going forward. We don't know. But we know that her name is enshrined in history for being in the line of Jesus because He used her to bring about His ultimate plan, which is kind of cool. Like there's something about that's kind of neat because it's like, it's kind of encouraging knowing it's like, hey, most of the people in the Bible probably didn't know how God was going to use them.
Yeah. And arguably all of this is hindsight.
Yeah.
When we read the Bible today.
Yeah. It's easy for us to see, right?
Yeah.
Because we can see all the pieces.
Exactly. But, we have the benefit of hindsight, but everyone that the scriptures talk about, they didn't have that benefit at all.
No.
They were just living their average Joe lives, doing whatever they were doing and, trying to please God as much as they could, not knowing that their lives had much greater significance than they knew.
Than they had. Then not only that, but they had ever envisioned, they ever probably dreamed. They had no idea. Like that's kind of cool.
It is cool.
Seeing how God uses people like that.
And so I guess to wrap it all up, like, I guess we can kind of go into some detail. Well, probably not detail, but we could talk about like, why is the birth of Jesus in this time so profound? What would you say is profound about this?
I think the thing that's the most profound about it is if you actually look at the people, right? Because that's kind of the thing that I've been trying to force myself to do when I'm reading the scriptures. Like, this isn't just a name on a page. This was a human being, right? Remember the human. Like, you look at this stuff, it's like Mary was very poor.
Mm-hmm.
Joseph was just a carpenter. He was a skilled labor. I'm not trying to knock that at all. But they came from a backwater village.
The sticks.
They came from the sticks in the Sea of Galilee. I mean, like, it's basically like God saying, hey, the Messiah is going to come from a mechanic that lives in Bakersfield. Like,
Yeah.
right. Like that's kind of what he's going. It's like, and
goodness.
I'm not trying to knock that at all, but it's like people of very humble, ordinary beginnings
Yeah.
kind of begot
Jesus was born of a blue collar worker.
Jesus was born of a blue collar worker in a trough.
Yeah.
Like, I need people to understand the significance of that. God didn't, not only like, cause you look at Herod, and Herod is kind of the epitome of the human condition at this point, right?
Yeah.
Like someone who is so caught up in maintaining his power and his control, where he literally will kill people that even tangentially threaten it.
Yeah.
And Jesus was like the antithesis of that. He was born to a really humble beginnings. He was born in a feed trough because his parents didn't have room at the inn where they were in this tiny little town where he was born in. It's like, this is crazy. Like Jesus was not he wasn't like this great televangelist preacher dude. He just was this guy.
Yep.
Like, and God uses people like that. And not only that, but it's like, it kind of is refreshing. Like knowing it's like, I mean, one of the things, have you ever seen The Passion of the Christ?
Yeah, I've seen it.
There's that scene in there where it's like for the first 30 years of Jesus's life, he probably worked as an apprentice for his dad. Like there's a scene in The Passion of the Christ where he's building a table for his mom.
Yeah.
And it's so
average.
That scene sticks out to me more than any in that movie. Like in The Passion of the Christ is this crazy movie, but that scene where he's like joking with his mom about how people at this table need to squat so that they can eat properly. Yeah. It's like, it humanizes him, right? Like it's just this, like the thing that is significant about this time period is it was not a particularly special time in history, right? Like they're just, the Jews had gotten conquered again. They're being like hounded by this despotic king who, to my knowledge, never got replaced. I think Pontius Pilate kind of took over the governance of the region after Herod died.
Yeah.
Or someone between Herod and Pontius Pilate. I don't remember off the top of my head.
I don't either.
But it's like, it wasn't significant in a worldly sense at all. Like, I think that's something that's really important to remember. Like, this is a tiny civilization under the thumb of a huge empire in a backwater town, to the point where the king sending his secret police to go kill children in it isn't even worth noting in history. Like that's how insignificant Jesus's birth was. Yeah. And God chose that on purpose because that's how he operates is he operates in that insignificance.
So to segue from that, you said that God chose that on purpose. I think the part about the story that's profound to me is the fact that this was all prophesied. Right. Like, even just in the little bit that we read from Matthew, that all of this happened to fulfill scripture that was written hundreds of years prior. And I think to kind of get back to the whole testament of, the authority and the reliability of scripture is that a lot of this stuff was prophesied. And here it is happening before our eyes. Much of it, some of it was kind of abstract and some of it was more hidden in the, I guess, the prophetic literary sense.
And only made sense after the event happened. Right?
Yeah, it only made sense after the fact. But, still, all of this was a part of the plan. It's not like God was like, it's not like he settled with Bethlehem. No. It's not like he settled with that time period. It's not like he settled with Herod. It was, everything was exactly the way he wanted it to be. And that right there is profound to me because that meant that God chose to be born in a manger. Right. That meant that God chose to be born to a carpenter family, a blue collar family from Bakersfield. Right. God intentionally brought himself low to be born into the world as probably one of the lower class people. Yeah. And that to me is it speaks so much because that means that Jesus, God is not the God of, the rich and the mighty and the powerful. He can be, he definitely extends grace to everyone, but his ultimate, beginnings are to those who can humble themselves, those who are of the low. When you look at the expansion of Christianity, after Christ's resurrection, it was mostly expansion amongst the lower class people. It was always the lower class, the workers, the slaves, and all of the lower class people that got the gospel message so much more. Probably because they needed it more. Right. It spoke more hope to them than anyone sitting in a high palace, made of cedar wood, Right. And so that I think is the profound part to me is that it was so intentional. Right. It was on purpose. And that right there is just like, and it also it's hard to say because everything was intentional, but also the death of the children was a part of the plan.
Mm-hmm.
I won't get into the detail on like I guess what the intentions or how the plan came about, but the prophecy was there and the prophecy was fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, God prophesied this would happen, and hey, it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And that's rough, but I mean that's life.
Well, I mean, and I would also just like I would go so far as to say is those were Herod's actions that did that.
Absolutely.
Just because God
prophesied it
or something prophesied it in the name of the Lord, and God gave them that knowledge, doesn't necessarily mean that it was God's fault. Like that, those actions were still entirely on Herod. Yeah. Like, because he was an evil man.
He was the one that committed the act. Absolutely.
Right. And I think that's something that's so interesting because you look at this juxtaposition of Jesus. It's like this poor family where she's giving birth in a barn.
Yeah.
And this man surrounded by 2,000 highly trained warriors in a palace of gold is so threatened by this that he will wipe out an entire generation to stop it. Like that's kind of crazy when you think about it. That's crazy. Like I that's insane. Like you look at that and it's like, how are you so scared by that? You know, because I think he recognized that because like you said, the painting is there, those fingerprints of God throughout scripture. And because he was raised as a Jew, he knew all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So that means like when he saw the signs coming, he's like, oh crap, you know, my time is up.
Yeah.
And for him, he was threatened by that to the point where he would kill to get away with it because he was so consumed by his own greed and his own power and his own will.
Yeah.
So,
and like, I guess to wrap it up, you know, as much as we want to call Herod the bad guy in the story, it reminds me like, how often am I the one that's on my high horse threatened? You know, like, and it's not even about, you know, threatened of a kingdom. It's about, you know, how often do I let my pride get in the way?
Right. Yeah.
You know, how often do I try and tear others down so that I can be raised high? You know?
Yeah.
And, you know, sure, he took it to the scale of actually killing people, but, you know, sin is sin. And even I on a different level can still commit the same sin of exerting power over other people
and cutting them down to maintain my position.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it could happen in the workplace. It could happen in your relationships. It could happen, you know, in your families. It could happen anywhere, you know? Yeah. And so I guess it's a humble reminder that no matter what, we are not the winners in the story.
No,
Jesus is.
Because he knows.
Yeah.
Everything we're going to try to do to stop it, God already knows. We're not bigger than God. We don't get that much credit.
Nope.
So
definitely
it's
not.
important to note that where it's like against your best wishes, God's will still come about. You know? And that can, and it is, God's will is always good in the end. And it's hard to see that over time, but you know, sometimes we get to look back at an event like the birth of Jesus and then look back over the past 2,000 years and get to see the whole picture. And that's kind of cool. And seeing how God operates. So
history of culture can be so transformed by someone born in a barn.
Right. Yeah. That's crazy. Like you look at that and you're like, oh, well, surely other great people like were born in palaces and stuff like that. No, Jesus was born in a barn and never was a wealthy man throughout the course of his life to the point where he was just a drifter.
Yeah.
Like, that's so weird. Like I've always thought about like, if Jesus showed up today, what would we think?
Weird.
It would be weird because if you actually think about the sort of person that Jesus would be today, it'd weird you out because that's just, like he'd look homeless and not living, or he'd just be kind of like this weird, crazy shaman dude. And I wonder how many people I pass like that on the street, you know? It's just, it's interesting. It's interesting thinking about that. Yeah. So,
definitely. Well, but, we'll probably release this episode near Christmas. So if you're listening, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
And, you know, if you're
Merry Chrysler.
Merry Chrysler. You would bring that up. Anyway, we hope you guys have a wonderful holidays, and here's to a better 2021.
Oh, please.
No matter what, no matter who's in the White House, no matter who's been elected.
Yep.
God is on the throne.
No matter how many vaccines have been distributed.
Yep.
God is on the throne. So.
And
amen.
Anyway, this is Levi Gonzalez.
This is Ben Stewart, and this has been The Bible is Metal. Thanks for tuning in.
Later.